we can't let compassion for one make us disregard compassion for the many. This happens in schools all the time, and we're going to talk a little bit about it today. Guys, welcome back to Be Good Leadership, and I'm Ronnie Caldwell, as always, trying to help everybody help school communities and people in schools get better. All right, so I want to talk a bit about, and it's actually easiest for me to first start talking about this in a story. So the situation that I was helping a client deal with was this impact that was being felt from a particular student. Now, many international schools, rightly, are trying to become more inclusive, meaning that students of all types we're allowing into schools, and our admission processes are becoming more open. And that's good, especially if we have the supports and we're being able to take in kids and supporting them, not simply just taking their tuition dollars and saying that we're being inclusive, but we're deciding, okay, we're going to put money into providing the supports for these kids and bringing them in. Now, this has been a practice in public schools for quite a while. You have a lot of leadership going into international schools and trying to bring that same ethos into a different environment, a private educational environment, but it stresses schools in many different ways. But I think the key idea of being more inclusive and supporting people of more inclusive needs is legitimate. But this situation was in a sense of a student was constantly hitting other kids. And this was in an elementary environment. And the administrator was dealing with a pressure to keep the kid on the basis that, hey, he's just a kid. But these particular behaviors were now in their second year. The kid had displayed some of these behaviors the previous year, had been a problem. And now going into the second year, constant disruptions, hitting other students, all these kind of things. And the administrator, when we were in our conversations, was dealing with this idea of, well, it's a kid. I want to continue working with them. And, and then also my head of school is very much like, it's just a kid. We have to have some compassion for this student and continue working with them. And I did say I could see the stress. I could see some cognitive dissonance that must be going on. And I said, well, how do the other parents feel? And she kind of just bound. She said, well, that's the thing is many of the other parents are complaining as well, because they don't want their kid hit. And this is happening over and over again. And the teacher, it's hard for the teacher because there's constant disruptions and everything else. Now, if I'm talking to teachers right now who are watching this, who are working in American public schools, or I was speaking to someone who was working in Scotland, but schools there, and apparently these kind of issues that I'm talking about, sadly, many people were like, well, yeah, that's just status quo. And what I would like to say is that it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be because I said, do you feel the compassion that you were showing for this one student is ending up being are you end up not being very compassionate for the whole? Are you focusing so much on the story of the individual that you're forgetting your job as a leader and your job as a school is actually to educate the whole? How are the other 20-something kids in the class being affected by this student who they don't know if they're going to hit them or lash out on a daily basis? How is it impacting the teacher and their quality and their ability to be able to teach the whole, to pay attention to the kids? How do the parents feel if over and over and over again, this child is being allowed to hurt their kids, intimidate their kids, scare their kids, what have you? And what I would say is that we have to balance our compassion for the individual with the actual job of the school leader and the job of the school, which is to educate and keep safe the whole. And we talk about restorative practices. People talk about, punishments don't work and all these kinds of things. And I get that and I understand. And much of the psychology around it, they're right that when it comes to an individual changing their behavior, you can punish them as much as you like, or give them consequences. But really, no one's going to change until they decide individually that it's time for them to change. right? Is that people change, you punish them or not punish them. Somebody has to click here to say, I'm going to do things differently and I'm going to change. That is 100% the case. However, what we also know from studies of tribal societies, societies in general, people feel safer in environments in which rules are enforced, in which there are consequences to bad behavior. Actually, what we find is the more that we have moved in a direction of taking the individual story and the individual kid into the utmost concern and treating it with the utmost compassion, the less safe students report feeling in school. The more students feel anxiety about school and behavior in it. The more people have taken their kids out of schools and decided to homeschool. Because it is a group. A school is a community of people. The individual has to be important. But at the same point in time, we have a larger responsibility to the greater community. Each person has to find who they are as an individual and has to be able to learn to behave to the best of their ability and to meet the expectations of the whole, of the group. This is in any society. And in school, it's no different. And we are losing the balance in many ways when we are being overly compassionate, if we want to use that word, because that word comes up quite a bit, to a particular student, to one particular student, and don't want to make the hard decision, which might be, this is not the best place at this point in time for this kid. This is not the best school for you right now. There's kind of a certain limit we can get to, but after that point, we've got to protect the other kids in the school and do what's best for their education and for their safety in the building. I'm not talking about learning exceptionalities, because when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about these kind of things, people oftentimes go to learning exceptionalities. If we have the resources, we should support and try to support diverse learners in every way we can. But if those students individually are creating an environment where it is actually diminishing the whole to the largest extent and not adding to it, which it can, and it does, we have to actually look at those things in a realistic way. We can't be in all one side or all the other. We have to find this balance, and it's a difficult one over and over again. I think that a great book that's outside of education sphere was written by Reinhold Niebuhr, Moral Man, Immoral Society. And it talks about the differences between how people act on an individual level and what they respond to versus group behavior and what the realities are of those things. Restorative behaviors, restorative ways of handling behavior come out of tribal societies where everybody is kin. Everybody has some type of relation to each other. Everybody has something they owe to each other in some way, shape, or form for their survival. So the ability to work through a restorative process with those people is very real. And it actually matters and makes a difference because there are social consequences even within it if you don't work it out, because you've got your family around. You've got people who are very close to each other, people who depend on each other for life and limb oftentimes. And there is a social consequence to not being able to restore this relationship and work through these problems. However, trying to apply that in occasions where we're not in a situation where everybody is kin. We are not in a situation where even sometimes the parents think that their kid owes anything to the other students. This happens where many parents don't believe, well, my kid is my kid and I want you to deal with my kid as an individual, not as part of a whole. And there's a legitimate part to that. But the reality is that that student is part of a whole when they are in school. And our responsibility in the classroom as a teacher is for the whole. Our responsibility as a school leader is to the whole. One student's interests, one student's personal story cannot supersede the well-being of the greater community. And that is just something that needs to be considered all the time. And I think that when we don't consider that, we're losing the trust of parents. We're losing the trust of even students who don't feel safe when schools continue to appease, keep students who are making the environment unsafe, are not meeting particular standards of behavior that the school has set and is supposed to be holding everybody to. But if no one is actually enforcing those behaviors, if no one is actually even recognizing the good behaviors and bringing consequences onto those bad behaviors that don't meet standard, then it becomes meaningless to the students, to the parents, to the teachers. And so this is a huge consideration. It might be one of the central challenges of our time in education. It's not necessarily our curriculum. It's not necessarily what we're teaching, how we're teaching. I think to a large extent, it's what we're allowing and what standard that we want to hold and teach students to, and teachers to, and to the adults, everyone in the building. And the job of a leader, the hard job of a leader, is to remember that their responsibility, while they want to work with each person and they understand the humanity of each individual in that building, their greater responsibility is to the well-being of a whole. And that has to be the basis of all decisions. Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. I hope it stimulated some thought. Please put any issues that you have with it here in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. And be good.